This is 2.1 case study. I am Ray Sweeney. We're going to be looking at the Klein Connect versus Gettysburg College case. The focus, this is regarding the duty to provide emergency care and risk management. The question we're looking at here will be, does an institution have a legal obligation to be prepared for a life-threatening medical emergency in a healthy student athlete? So this would be different than, let's say, a case where a student has asthma. Obviously, you have to have the systems in place, whether that be an inhaler or whatever the case may be. This is different because it is a student who didn't have any underlying health issues. There was nothing that indicated that he might have an issue or a medical emergency. So the question at hand here is, do you have to have the systems in place for an emergency in a student who has been healthy prior to the emergency itself? So for the context, this case redefined the standard of care for athletic departments across the country. Looking at some of the facts of the case, we had Drew Kleinknecht, a 20-year-old lacrosse player with no known medical issues. It took place in September of 1988 during an out-of-season practice. The emergency was Drew suffered a sudden cardiac arrest and he collapsed on the field. You have to keep in mind, this is 1988, so the technology obviously wasn't as advanced as it is now. So they didn't have cell phones. They didn't have any way of contacting some medical professionals they needed in order to care for Drew. And the outcome being Drew unfortunately passed away before medical help could arrive. Looking at the plaintiff's argument, I think the key to this would be the special relationship. So because the college recruited Drew to come play lacrosse for them, they entered into a special relationship that required a higher level of protection. It would be similar in a public school. The students come into your building every day, therefore it is your duty to protect the students. So the foreseeability, so while Drew was healthy, the plaintiffs argued that the cardiac collapse is known in a foreseeable risk in a high-intensity contact sport. You just kind of have to have the mindset of when you're playing a sport like that, you almost have to expect an emergency. And the breach of duty, the school failed to provide prompt and adequate emergency care. Specifically looking at emergency action plans, there was none. The plaintiff's argument was simply if there was an emergency action plan in place, Drew might still be here today. The defense's argument, the college argued that they could not have predicted a healthy 20-year-old would suffer a heart attack, and they contended that coaches acted reasonably by immediately trying to get professional medical help. The school argued that it was an undue burden to require athletic trainers at every single athletic event. And the court's findings. The initial ruling was that the trial court originally sided with the college, saying the event was not foreseeable. The Third Circuit Court of Appeals eventually reversed that decision, and the court held that the college did owe Drew a duty of care. This was a key legal precedent because they decided that foreseeability was not about Drew's specific heart condition, but instead it was about just the well-being of all of the athletes there. So it wasn't about a specific medical emergency or a specific student athlete. Instead, it's about caring for all the athletes that are under the coach's supervision. Today, we have emergency action plans essentially because of this case. So head coaches, assistants, like that's who's in charge. Therefore, they have to have the systems in place to ensure their athletes are safe. So the specific location of the nearest landline or a designated cell phone is required to be known. There also has to be an exact location of an AED. Must be accessible within 3 minutes, and then explicit instructions on which gate or door the ambulance enters whenever there is that emergency. And then emergencies must be documented following that. So all of this is in place because of this case in 1988, and we see it not only in athletics, but day-to-day in schools. There's emergency action plans for essentially everything that takes place throughout a school day. Administrative implications. So, like I said, we now have an emergency action plan for every field, gym, and court in the district. A working phone or radio is now mandatory for every practice. There are no exceptions. There's training. So if you're a coach, you have to be trained in CPR and AED. This is very crucial, and you have to think in a case like Drew's, had they known some of these, not only if they had emergency action plans, but if they had been trained in these scenarios, if the outcome might have been different. And then looking specifically from a college standpoint, you have to understand that when you invite or recruit an athlete, it is your duty to protect that athlete. And then how this ties into the 14 legal duties we've been looking at. It touches multiple of the 14 duties, the duty to plan being one. So this is looking at the EAP. If you don't have that, that is a complete failure of the duty to plan. The duty to provide emergency care. Schools must have the staff and equipment to provide immediate aid. Like we talked about in Drew's case, was there going to be medical attention? Yes, but was it in an adequate time period? No, it was not. So therefore, they did not complete their duty to provide emergency care. The duty to supervise. So supervision is not only just watching the students, but ensuring the environment is safe and that help is accessible if an athlete needs it. And then understanding that it's the AD's job to ensure that these duties are being met by every coach on staff and every coach that's under their watch. So that's kind of how the AD ties into it. It's not necessarily carrying out these duties, but ensuring that your coaches understand them and are able to carry them out. So that is my case. I appreciate you watching.